The moment I opened that glossy envelope, my breath caught in my throat. There they were, my parents and brother smiling in matching cream sweaters, posed perfectly beside a glittering Christmas tree. "The Williams family wishes you joy this holiday season," read the elegant script below. The Williams family, as if I wasn't part of it. As if I hadn't spent years sacrificing everything to keep them afloat. This wasn't an oversight or mistake. It was the third consecutive year I'd been erased from our family portrait. But what I didn't realize then, staring at that picture with burning eyes, was that this rejection would set in motion a chain of events that would completely transform my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Williams, though you wouldn't know it from our family holiday cards. I'm 29, with auburn hair I rarely have time to style properly, and dark circles under my eyes that speak to years of putting everyone else's needs before my own. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but clean and functional, with large windows that let in the morning light. It's all I've allowed myself despite working 60-hour weeks as a senior accountant at Morrison Reed Financial. Most of my colleagues live in sleek downtown condos or have purchased charming starter homes in the suburbs. They take tropical vacations and post photos of expensive restaurant meals on social media. Meanwhile, I've been funneling a significant portion of my salary to my parents' struggling bookstore for the past 6 years, ever since my father's heart scare left them with medical bills they couldn't manage. The store, Turning Pages, sits on a quiet corner in Evanston. It's a beautiful space with exposed brick walls and towering oak shelves, but it's been hemorrhaging money since online retailers took over the market. My father, Robert, refuses to adapt. No ebooks, no online presence, no events to bring in new customers. Just the same dusty inventory and increasingly desperate phone calls to me whenever a bill comes due. My mother, Catherine, teaches piano lessons on the side, but most of her energy goes into managing my father's moods and making excuses for why they need just a little more help this month. My younger brother, Mark, now 24, bounced between college majors before settling on marketing, though he's never marketed anything for the family business. Somehow, I became responsible for keeping everything afloat. Every month, like clockwork, I transfer funds to cover their mortgage. I pay the store's utilities. I covered Mark's college expenses when his scholarship fell through. Last year, when the store's roof leaked after heavy spring rains, I drained my vacation fund to pay for repairs. I haven't taken a proper vacation in 4 years. I do all this while being gradually erased from the family narrative. At Thanksgiving, they discuss weekend brunches I'm never invited to. My parents attended Mark's average college graduation with beaming pride and professional photography, while they were too busy to see me receive my CPA license after years of studying while working full-time. My mother remembers to call on my birthday, usually a day late, with a conversation that rarely lasts more than 5 minutes. I've made excuses for years. They're stressed about money. Dad's health makes them preoccupied. Mark is the youngest. Of course they worry about him more. I'm the responsible one. I don't need the same attention. I repeat these justifications to myself as I approve yet another transfer, buy another plane ticket to fly home when the store has a crisis, listen to another complaint about how difficult their lives are. That holiday card was delivered 3 days before Christmas. I just worked a 14-hour day closing year-end accounts for our biggest client, my back aching from hunching over spreadsheets, my eyes strained from staring at numbers. I collected my mail, shuffling through the stack as I climbed the 3 flights to my apartment. Bill, advertisement, another bill, and then that cream envelope with my mother's distinctive handwriting. I knew what it was immediately. The annual the Williams family Christmas card, always professionally photographed, always printed on premium cardstock, always sent to everyone in their social circle. A tradition my mother prioritized even in the leanest years, insisting it was important to keep up appearances. Standing in my kitchen, still wearing my winter coat, I stared at those 3 smiling faces. They'd coordinated outfits this year, cream cable knit sweaters against a backdrop of evergreen and twinkling lights. It looked warm and festive and loving. It looked like a family that didn't include me. The first year it happened, Mom claimed they'd taken the photo spontaneously after Sunday dinner, a dinner I'd missed because I was working late. "We should have scheduled another one with you," she said, not sounding particularly sorry. "It just turned out so well, and we were on a deadline with the printer." The second year, when I called to ask why I wasn't included, she sighed as if I was being difficult. "We meant to do another session, Sarah, but you know how busy December gets. By the time we could coordinate, it was too late to meet the mailing deadline. Never mind that I had visited 3 times that month and could have easily taken a photo. This third time, I didn't even call. What would be the point?" The message was clear. I was the family bank, not the family daughter. Good enough to solve their problems, but not good enough to stand beside them in a portrait. I pinned the card to my refrigerator as a reminder. Of what? I wasn't quite sure yet. Maybe that no amount of sacrifice would ever make them see me as essential. Maybe that I'd been living with a comforting delusion about my place in their lives. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about all the money I'd given them over the years, all the opportunities I'd passed up to solve their self-created crises. The promotion I'd declined because it would have meant traveling too, much to be available for their emergencies. The relationship that had fizzled because I never had time for proper dates between work and family obligations. When my alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., I hadn't slept more than a couple of hours, but I dragged myself to the office anyway. Year-end closing wait for no one's emotional crisis. I was reviewing a particularly complex tax situation for a client when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made me freeze. Aunt Eleanor's will, important information. It was from my Uncle Thomas, my father's brother, whom I rarely heard from except at occasional family gatherings. My Aunt Eleanor had passed away 8 weeks earlier. She was my father's older sister, a retired librarian who had lived alone in her book-filled Victorian house in Madison, Wisconsin. Growing up, I'd always felt a connection with her that I couldn't quite explain. She was quiet and thoughtful in a family that valued neither quality. She asked questions about my interests and actually listened to the answers. During college, I occasionally drove up to visit her, and we'd spend hours drinking tea and discussing books, or her travels, or my studies. After graduation, those visits became less frequent as my family's financial demands increased, but we still exchanged birthday cards and occasional emails. When she died after a short battle with pancreatic cancer, I'd been devastated but, too, swamped with work and family obligations to do more than attend the funeral and offer generic condolences. I opened the email with a strange sense of foreboding. "Dear Sarah," it read, "as executor of Eleanor's estate, I'm writing to inform you that she has left you a specific bequest in her will. The sum of $75,000 and her collection of first edition classics are to be transferred to you following the completion of probate, which should be finalized by the end of January. Eleanor left a personal note to be delivered to you along with this notification, which I've attached to this email. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sincerely, Thomas Williams. My hands trembled as I clicked on the attachment. It was a scan of a handwritten note on Eleanor's personal stationery, her elegant penmanship instantly recognizable. To my dear niece Sarah, who reminds me so much of myself. May this gift help you build the life you deserve, not just the one others expect from you. Your kindness should be a choice, not an obligation. With love, Eleanor. I read it 3 times, tears blurring my vision. In those few lines, my aunt had seen me more clearly than my own parents ever had. She recognized the trap I was in, the trap of being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who would always sacrifice herself for others. And in her final act, she had thrown me a lifeline. $75,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make a difference, enough for a down payment on a place of my own, enough to take a breath, enough to contemplate a life where I wasn't constantly drained by others' needs. The first edition books held their own value, both financial and sentimental. I knew Eleanor's collection included signed copies of modern classics and several rare 19th century novels, but more than their monetary worth, they represented a connection to the one family member who had truly seen me. I was still sitting there, staring at the email when my phone rang. My father's name flashed on the screen. Somehow, I already knew why he was calling. "Sarah," he said without preamble, his voice sharp with something I initially mistook for excitement. "Thomas. Just told me about Eleanor's will. This is completely unfair. You barely knew her." "No, hello, no, how are you?" Just immediate indignation that something had been given to me rather than him. "I visited her regularly for years," I said quietly, conscious of my colleagues working nearby. "We were close." "Well, it doesn't make sense," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "The family could really use that money for the bookstore. We're thinking you should sign it over to us when it comes through. The business needs a new point-of-sale system, and Mark needs to move to a better apartment closer to downtown for his networking opportunities. Plus, your mother has been wanting to renovate the kitchen for years." I listened to him parceling out my inheritance before I'd even received it, planning how my windfall would solve their problems. Just like every bonus I'd ever received. Just like every raise that had come my way. Just like every opportunity that had been redirected to meet their needs. Something inside me, something that had been bending for years, stretching thinner and thinner with each demand, finally snapped. "No," I said, the word falling from my lips before I'd consciously decided to say it. "What?" My father sounded genuinely confused, as if he couldn't process the syllable. "I said no," I repeated, my voice steadier this time. "This was Aunt Eleanor's decision, and I'm going to honor it. The money and books are mine." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost see him, face reddening, fingers tightening around the phone, the vein in his temple pulsing the way it did when he was angry but trying to maintain control. "Well," he finally said, his voice cold and clipped. "I never thought you'd turn your back on family when we need you. Your mother is very disappointed." The familiar weight of guilt pressed down on me, but for once I didn't buckle under it. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, "but my decision stands." He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat at my desk, heart racing but mind strangely clear. For 6 years, I'd been operating under the assumption that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, they would finally see me, really see me, include me, value me for more than my financial contributions. That holiday card had told me otherwise, and now my father's reaction to the inheritance confirmed it. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a resource to be tapped, a solution to their problems, a safety net they had come to take for granted. That evening, I didn't call them back or check in as I normally would have after a disagreement. Instead, I went home to my small apartment, made a cup of chamomile tea, and sat by the window overlooking the city lights. Chicago sparkled in the clear December night, thousands of windows glowing with the lives of people I'd never meet. How many of them were caught in the same trap? I was. How many were giving and giving without receiving anything in return? I pulled out my laptop and created a spreadsheet. the accountant in me finding comfort in the orderliness of columns and formulas. I documented every payment I'd made to my parents over the past 6 years, every bill I'd covered, every emergency I'd solved. Credit card statements, bank transfers, Venmo receipts. The evidence was all there. The total made me physically ill, $103,426. More than $100,000. Enough for a substantial down payment on a home. Enough for an advanced degree. Enough to start a business, travel the world, or simply live without the constant anxiety of supporting multiple households on one income. Then I made another list. Every important moment in my life they had missed or minimized over those same years. My CPA certification, my promotion to senior accountant, the accounting award I'd received from the Chicago Business Association, the 3 dates I'd gone on with David, the tax attorney I'd really liked, before having to cancel our 4th date to help my father with urgent store inventory on a Saturday night. David hadn't asked me out again. When I finished, I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The anger I expected to feel didn't come. Instead, there was a strange sense of clarity, as if I was seeing my situation from a distance for the first time. I had been complicit in this dynamic. Every time I answered those calls, every time I transferred money without question, every time I accepted their excuses for excluding me, I had reinforced the pattern. I had taught them how to treat me. But Aunt Eleanor's note echoed in my mind. Your kindness should be a choice, not an obligation. I made a decision that night. I wouldn't confront them or make speeches or demand recognition. I would simply begin acting as if my life, my needs, my future, my happiness mattered as much as theirs. Not out of spite or revenge, but out of a fundamental need for balance that had been missing for too long. The next morning, I called my bank and canceled the automatic monthly transfer to my parents' account. I removed my credit card from their phone plan and the bookstore's utility accounts. I took my name off as the emergency contact for their business insurance. I didn't announce these changes or write a manifesto explaining my reasoning. After years of explaining, justifying, and apologizing, I chose a different path. Quiet action, rather than words that would only be twisted or dismissed. Instead of sending money to solve their problems, I scheduled a consultation with a financial advisor to discuss how best to manage the inheritance when it arrived. I researched neighborhoods where I might want to buy a condo. I signed up for a photography workshop, a passion I'd abandoned years ago when every spare dollar went to my family's needs. For the first time in my adult life, I was planning for my future rather than managing their present crises. It felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The first week passed in surprising tranquility. I focused on wrapping up year-end projects at work, attended my photography class, and started gathering documents I would need for a mortgage pre-approval. I declined 4 calls from my mother and 2 from my brother, not ready yet to engage in the conversations I knew were coming. In their absence, I discovered pockets of time I hadn't realized existed. Evenings not spent on marathon phone calls about bookstore problems, weekends not consumed by emergency trips to help with inventory or repairs. I used those hours to reconnect with college friends I'd lost touch with, to read books for pleasure, to wander through art galleries and simply breathe. These small acts of reclaiming my time felt like revolutionary acts of self-care after years of neglect. The peace lasted exactly 8 days before reality crashed back in the form of my mother on my doorstep, unannounced, on a Tuesday evening when I'd just returned from work. "The utility bill is overdue, and there's nothing in the account," she said, pushing past me into my apartment without waiting for an invitation. She looked around with barely concealed disapproval, as if my modest home was an indulgence rather than a necessity. "The automatic transfer never went through. Is something wrong with your bank?" I closed the door slowly, using the moment to compose myself. "No, nothing's wrong with the bank. I canceled the transfer. I won't be making those payments anymore." She stared at me, her face a mixture of confusion and dawning alarm. "What do you mean? We're counting on that money." "I know you are," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But it's not sustainable for me to support 2 households on my salary. Not anymore." Her expression hardened. "Is this about that stupid holiday card?" "Mark designed it, and he just used a photo they had taken after Sunday dinner." "You're being childish." Of course she would trivialize it, reduce 6 years of systematic exclusion to 1 greeting card, make me the unreasonable one for noticing the pattern. "This isn't about the card," I said, though of course it partly was. "It's about 6 years of supporting everyone while being treated like an outsider. It's about giving and giving without any recognition or reciprocity. I'm done." "We're your family," she exclaimed, as if those words alone should override any concern for fairness or mutual respect. "You can't just abandon us because of some perceived slight. What will people think?" That was always her primary concern. Appearances, other people's opinions, how things looked rather than how they actually were. "I'm not sure I care anymore what people think," I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I care about building a sustainable life where I'm not constantly drained by one-way relationships." She looked at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. After a lifetime of compliance, my boundary was incomprehensible to her. She gathered her purse, clutching it like a shield. "Your father is going to be furious," she said, her final attempt at control. "Don't expect us to be there when Eleanor's money runs out and you need help." The threat might have wounded me once, but now I recognized it for what it was. A desperate attempt to maintain the status quo, to frighten me back into my assigned role. I simply nodded and held the door open for her. After she left, I leaned against the closed door, heart pounding but resolve steadier than ever. I had done it, stated a boundary and held it, despite the guilt trip, despite the accusations, despite the lifelong habit of giving in to keep the peace. It felt like the first step on a very long journey toward a life that was truly mine. 3 days later, I received a notification from my bank about unusual account activity. Someone had attempted to access my online banking portal multiple times, triggering the security system to lock the account. I knew immediately who it was. Only my parents had ever asked for my passwords, just in case of emergency. I had stupidly shared them years ago, never imagining they would use that information against me. I immediately called the bank, changed all my passwords, and added 2-factor authentication to every financial account I possessed. While I was at it, I checked my credit report to ensure there were no unauthorized accounts in my name. I knew financial abuse was common in toxic family dynamics, but I had never imagined it would happen to me. That evening, a text from my brother arrived. "Dad's looking for your new password. Says the joint account isn't working anymore." What's going on? There was no joint account, just my personal checking account that my father had apparently come to view as family property. I replied simply, "There is no joint account, Mark. Just my personal account that Dad is trying to access without permission. Please don't give him any of my information." Minutes later, my phone rang. My brother calling. I almost declined it, but something told me to answer. "Sarah, what's happening?" His voice sounded genuinely confused. "Dad is freaking out. Mom keeps crying. They say you've cut them off without warning." "I stopped sending money," I corrected. "After supporting everyone for 6 years, I've decided I need to focus on my own financial security for a while." "But the store has been failing for years, Mark, despite tens of thousands of dollars I've poured into it. It's not a temporary rough patch. It's a business model that doesn't work anymore." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know you were sending them that much money." No one did. That was the point, I think, to keep it quiet so everything could look normal. So Dad could pretend the store was doing fine, and Mom could pretend the house wasn't mortgaged to the hilt, and you could pretend your education didn't cost 3 times what they could afford. That's not fair, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe not, I conceded. But neither was expecting me to fund everyone's lifestyle while being treated like an afterthought. Another pause. The holiday card. Among other things. I could almost see him running the calculus in his head, reconsidering family dynamics he had never questioned before. "They're saying you've changed because of Aunt Eleanor's money," he finally said, "that it's gone to your head." I laughed, not unkindly. "The money isn't even in my account yet." This isn't about the inheritance, except that it made me realize I've been enabling a situation that isn't healthy for any of us. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked, and I heard the genuine anxiety in his voice. He had never had to plan for financial independence. Why would he, when I had been the fallback for so long? "Live within your means," I suggested gently. "Take on more hours at your job. Apply for those grants we talked about for your master's program. Stop agreeing to expensive apartments you can't afford just because Dad thinks they're good for networking. You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," I admitted, "but it's necessary for all of us." After we hung up, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Mark wasn't a bad person, just someone who had been raised in a system where financial responsibility was always shifted to someone else. Maybe this would be his wake-up call, too. That hope was short-lived. The next morning, I had 3 missed calls from my mother and a text that sent a chill through me. A photo of their mortgage statement with "past due" stamped across it in alarming red letters, followed by, "This is what you've done to us." A was a masterclass in manipulation, the visual evidence of their distress, the direct accusation of blame, the implicit demand that I fix it immediately. 6 months ago, I would have transferred the money within minutes, overcome with guilt and a desperate need to solve their problems. Today, I set my phone down without responding and went to make breakfast. Their mortgage wasn't what I had done to them. It was a financial obligation they had taken on and then systematically avoided addressing realistically for years. My refusal to enable their financial irresponsibility any longer wasn't the cause of their problems. It was merely the removal of the bandage that had been covering the wound. Over the next week, the messages escalated. My father sent a long email detailing all the sacrifices they had made for me growing up. Music lessons, braces, college tuition, conveniently forgetting my scholarships had covered 80% of the costs, and I had worked part-time throughout to cover most of the rest. My mother texted daily updates about bills they couldn't pay, repairs they couldn't afford, and the emotional toll my abandonment was taking on them. Mark forwarded an email from his graduate program advisor warning him about missed tuition payments. Each message was designed to hook into my deeply ingrained sense of responsibility, to make me question my decision, to pull me back into the role of family savior. I read them all, acknowledged the discomfort they triggered in me, and then continued with my life. I didn't argue or defend or explain. I simply refused to take on problems that weren't mine to solve. Instead, I focused on the life I was building. I attended my photography class, learning to see the world through a different lens, quite literally. I met with the financial advisor, who helped me create a realistic budget that included retirement savings for the first time in my adult life. I scheduled viewings of condos in neighborhoods I had previously considered out of reach. Slowly, painfully, I was untangling my sense of self-worth from my usefulness to others. Aunt Eleanor's words became a mantra. Your kindness should be a choice, not an obligation. 2 weeks after my mother's visit, just as I was beginning to hope the worst was over, my father appeared at my workplace. I was returning from lunch when I spotted him pacing in the lobby, his face set in the determined expression I knew all too well. My stomach dropped. He had never visited my office before, had never shown interest in my professional life beyond asking if raises were forthcoming. His presence here was a calculated move, bringing our private conflict into my public space where I would be forced to manage not only his emotions, but also my professional reputation. He spotted me before I could retreat. "Sarah," he called, loud enough that several colleagues turned to look. "We need to talk about this inheritance situation. You're being incredibly selfish." I approached him with outward calm, though my heart was racing. "Dad, this isn't the place," I said quietly. "Where is the place, Sarah?" he demanded, his voice rising. "You won't answer our calls. You've cut us off without warning, and now your mother is stress-baking at 3 a.m. because we might lose the house." My boss, Jennifer, appeared beside me, a tall woman with a commanding presence who had always impressed me with her ability to handle difficult clients with grace. "Is everything okay, Sarah?" she asked, her eyes assessing the situation. Quickly. Before I could answer, my father turned to her. "My daughter received an inheritance and is refusing to help her family. We might lose our business because of her selfishness." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. 6 years of building a professional reputation, only to have my father reduce me to a disobedient child in front of my boss and colleagues. But Jennifer's expression remained neutral, her voice calm but firm. "Sir, this is a place of business. If you're harassing one of my employees, I'll need to ask you to leave." Harassing? I'm her father. His indignation was genuine. In his mind, his relationship to me entitled him to my money, my time, my very personhood. "And this is her workplace," Jennifer countered, nodding to the security guard who had appeared nearby. "Please leave, or I'll have security escort you out." My father looked between us, seeming to realize for the first time that he had miscalculated. His power over me had always been emotional, built on years of conditioning and guilt. But here, in this professional space, those weapons were less effective. "This isn't over, Sarah," he said, turning to leave. "Your mother and I raised you better than this." The security guard followed him to ensure he left the building. When he was gone, Jennifer placed a hand on my shoulder. "Take the rest of the day off. And Sarah, whatever's happening, remember that no one has the right to make you feel responsible for their choices." I blinked back tears, overwhelmed by her support and the deep truth of her words. "Thank you," I managed to say before gathering my things and leaving. Walking home in the crisp January air, I felt a strange mixture of shame and liberation. The shame was old, the feeling of being exposed as somehow defective, of failing to meet expectations, of causing disappointment. But the liberation was new, the realization that my father's tactics were visible to others for what they were. I wasn't crazy or selfish or ungrateful. I was simply an adult woman establishing reasonable boundaries. That evening, I called my brother again, worried about how he was handling the escalating situation. When he answered, his voice was hushed, as if he was trying not to be overheard. "Sarah, things are getting weird here," he said. "Dad's talking about hiring a lawyer to contest Aunt Eleanor's will. He says she must have been manipulated or confused when she wrote it." I sighed, unsurprised but still disappointed. Aunt Eleanor was of completely sound mind, and she was free to leave her belongings to whomever she chose. Her will isn't legally vulnerable. "I know that," Mark said, "but he's fixated on it. And Mom keeps going through old photo albums, pointing out all the times they sacrificed for you, as if she's building a case." "Are you okay?" I asked, suddenly concerned for him. At 24, he was an adult, but he had never experienced our parents' manipulation turned against him before. "I don't know," he admitted. "I always thought they were just normal parents. Stressed about money, sure, but normal. Now I'm seeing things differently, and it's uncomfortable." "I understand," I said, remembering my own gradual awakening. "It's hard to recognize unhealthy patterns when you've been raised to see them as normal. The thing is," he continued, his voice even quieter, I've been thinking about what you said, about living within my means. And you're right. I don't need this expensive apartment. I don't need Dad's ideas about networking. I've been looking at roommate listings in more affordable neighborhoods. His words sent a surge of hope through me. Maybe something good could come from this painful situation after all. Maybe Mark could break free of the family patterns before spending years trapped in them as I had been. That sounds like a wise plan, I said carefully, not wanting to push too hard. If you need help figuring out a realistic budget, I'm happy to help. Thanks. I might take you up on that. He paused. And Sarah? I'm sorry about the holiday. Card. I should have said something when they didn't include you. The simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thank you for saying that, I managed. I've got to go. They're back from the store. Just be careful, okay? Dad's really angry, and when he gets like this, he doesn't let things go easily. After we hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about Mark's warning. I knew my father well enough to know he was right. This wasn't over. The question was, what form would the next escalation take? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The following weekend, I arrived home from a morning photography outing to find my car missing from its usual parking spot. At first, I thought it had been towed, though I couldn't imagine why. I was current on my parking permit for the building's lot. Then a more disturbing possibility occurred to me. I called my brother. Mark, is my car at Mom and Dad's house? I asked without preamble when he answered. There was a telling pause before he replied. How did you know? My stomach dropped. Because it's not in my parking lot where I left it. Are you telling me they took it? Dad drove it here last night. He said you'd lent it to them because their car is in the shop. I thought it sounded weird, but you believed him because he's your father, and fathers don't usually steal their daughters' cars. I finished for him. Mark, I need you to take a photo of the car right now and send it to me. Then I need you to not tell them we've spoken. Why? What are you going to do? The right thing, I said, already reaching for my laptop to file a police report. They've taken this too far. Within 10 minutes, I had filed an online police report for vehicle theft, including the license plate number, a description of the car, and its current location based on the photo Mark had sent. I indicated that I knew who had taken it and where it was located. An hour later, 2 police officers called to take my statement. I explained the situation calmly, providing proof of ownership, and making it clear that I had never given permission for anyone to take my vehicle. We'll send officers to recover the vehicle, one officer told me. Would you like to press charges? The question gave me pause. Did I want my own father arrested for theft? No, of course not. But I also knew that without real consequences, the boundary violations would continue, possibly escalating further. Yes, I said finally. I want to press charges. What followed was one of the most surreal afternoons of my life. While I waited in my apartment, the police went to my parents' house, confronted them about the stolen vehicle, and arrested my father when he claimed the car was family property that he had every right to use. Mark called me, panicked. Dad's been arrested. The police are saying he stole your car. Mom's hysterical. What is happening? He did steal my car, Mark, I said gently. Taking someone's vehicle without permission is theft, regardless of family connection. But to have him arrested? Sarah, this is extreme. What was extreme was driving to my apartment building, somehow getting my spare key, and taking my car in the middle of the night, I pointed out. This isn't a family disagreement anymore. This is criminal behavior. He was quiet for a moment. I don't even recognize our family anymore. Everything's falling apart. I know it feels that way, I said. But maybe what's falling apart are the unhealthy patterns that have been hurting all of us for years. After he hung up, I sat on my couch feeling physically ill. I had never imagined our family conflict would reach this point. Police involvement, criminal charges. The public shame my parents had always been so desperate to avoid. There was no satisfaction in it, only a deep sadness for what our family could have been if genuine love and respect had been the foundation rather than control and financial dependence. My car was returned to me later that evening by a police officer who seemed to have seen this kind of family drama before. My father was released on bail the following day, with a court date set for the theft charge and a restraining order prohibiting him from coming near my home or workplace. The restraining order had been the officer's suggestion, not mine, but I hadn't objected. After the workplace confrontation and now the car theft, it seemed clear that traditional boundaries weren't enough. Legal ones were necessary. In the days that followed, I received a barrage of messages from extended family members and my parents' friends. Flying monkeys dispatched to make me see reason and drop the charges. Aunt Patricia called to tell me I was breaking my mother's heart. Uncle William emailed about the importance of forgiveness. My mother's best friend Diane texted that I was destroying my family over a silly misunderstanding. None of them knew the full story, the years of financial exploitation, the systematic exclusion, the slow erasure of my personhood in service to my family's needs. None of them wanted to know. It was easier to cast me as the villain, the ungrateful daughter, than to examine the unhealthy dynamic that had led to this breaking point. I didn't defend myself to any of them. I simply thanked them for their concern and ended the conversations as quickly as possible. Their opinions couldn't change my course now. The path back to my old role was closed, not just by my choice, but by the legal reality of restraining orders and criminal charges. A week after my father's arrest, the inheritance from Aunt Eleanor was finally deposited into my account. The timing felt significant, as if she had somehow known I would need this financial cushion precisely when the last bridges to my family were burning. Along with the money came the promised books, 10 carefully packed boxes delivered by a specialty courier, each volume wrapped in acid-free paper and cushioned to prevent damage. I spent an entire weekend unpacking them, running my fingers over leather bindings and gilt-edged pages, discovering margin notes in Aunt Eleanor's precise handwriting. In a first edition of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, she had underlined the famous passage about a woman needing money and a room of her own to write fiction, adding in the margin, "To live authentically requires the same." Those words resonated deeply. I was creating my own room now, not just a physical space, but an emotional and financial one where I could finally live authentically, free from the constant drain of one-sided relationships. The following Monday, I made an offer on a small but sun-filled condo in a neighborhood closer to downtown. It was within my budget even without the inheritance, though Eleanor's gift meant I could put down a larger down payment and reduce my monthly mortgage costs. By Friday, my offer had been accepted. As I signed the purchase agreement, I felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, unlike anything I'd experienced before. This wasn't an achievement that would be celebrated by family dinners or congratulatory phone calls. It wasn't a milestone that would be marked by toasts or professional photography. It was a private victory, the creation of a sanctuary that was truly mine, paid for with my own money, chosen according to my own preferences. That weekend, as I began packing my apartment for the upcoming move, I received an unexpected text from Mark. "Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? I need to talk to you about something important." We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe halfway between our neighborhoods, neutral territory. When I arrived, Mark was already there, a manila folder on the table beside his coffee cup. He looked different somehow, older, more serious, with shadows under his eyes that reminded me of my own. "Thanks for coming," he said as I sat down. "I know things have been crazy." "That's one word for it," I agreed. "How are you doing?" He shrugged. "It's been educational. Mom cries a lot. Dad alternates between rage and self-pity. The preliminary hearing for the theft charge is next week. They've had to take out a loan to pay for the lawyer. I nodded, unsure what to say. I hadn't dropped the charges, despite numerous pleas from various family members. Some lessons, it seemed, could only be learned through consequences. But that's not why I wanted to see you, Mark continued, pushing the manila folder toward me. I've been doing some thinking. A lot of thinking, actually, about what you said about living within your means and taking responsibility. And I realized that I've been part of the problem too. He opened the folder to reveal a stack of cashier's checks, each for $500, along with a handwritten list of dates and amounts. What is this? I asked, confused. It's the beginning of what I owe you, Mark said, his voice steady but quiet. I went through my bank statements for the past 4 years and calculated everything you paid for me. The apartment security deposits, the tuition gap when my scholarship fell through, the car repairs, the emergency credit card bills. It adds up to just over $42,000. I stared at him, speechless. Of all the scenarios I had imagined for this meeting, this hadn't even been on the list. I can't pay it all back at once, he continued when I didn't speak. But I've worked out a payment plan, $500 a month until it's paid off. I got a second job bartending on weekends to make it work. Mark, I began, not sure what to say. I never expected you to pay me back. I know you didn't, he said. That's part of the problem. Nobody expected to pay you back because we all treated your money like it was just available, like it didn't cost you anything to give it to us. But it did, didn't it? It cost you your savings, your freedom, maybe even relationships. I nodded, throat tight with sudden emotion. Yes, I managed. It did. I've been doing a lot of thinking since Dad got arrested, Mark said, turning his coffee cup in slow circles. At first, I was angry at you. It seemed extreme, having him arrested over a car. But then I started remembering things. The way they always dismissed your achievements, the constant emergencies that only you could solve. How they'd make plans without you, and then act surprised when you felt excluded. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. The holiday cards were just the visible part of it, weren't they? They've been writing you out of the family in 100 small ways for years. The simple acknowledgement, the validation that I hadn't been imagining things, that the pattern was real and destructive, brought tears to my eyes. Yes, I said again, unable to find more eloquent words through the emotion. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, he said. I was so used to being the baby of the family, the one everyone protected and made allowances for. I never realized that protection came at your expense. I reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. You were a kid, Mark. It wasn't your responsibility to fix the family dynamic. I'm not a kid anymore, he said firmly. And I'm done being part of the problem. That's why I need you to accept these payments. Not just for your sake, but for mine too. I need to learn that actions have consequences, financial and otherwise. I studied the checks and the careful list he had compiled. This wasn't just about money. It was about recognition, acknowledgement of what I had sacrificed, validation that my contributions had been real and significant. After years of feeling invisible, being seen so clearly was overwhelming. Okay, I said finally. I'll accept the payments, but I want you to put half of each payment into a savings account for yourself. Think of it as building your own safety net so you never have to depend on someone else's resources again. He nodded, looking relieved and determined. Deal. And there's one more thing. He pulled another document from the folder, a rental application. I found a roommate situation in a cheaper neighborhood. The rent is half what I'm paying now, and it's actually closer to campus. I move in next month. That's great, I said, genuinely pleased. How did Mom and Dad take it? His grimace told me everything. Dad says I'm abandoning the family just like you did. Mom cried and asked how she's supposed to explain to her friends that both her children live in those kinds of neighborhoods. I couldn't help but laugh, though there was little humor in it. Heaven forbid their carefully constructed image should reflect reality. Yeah, well, I'm learning that their approval isn't worth the price tag it comes with. He hesitated. There's something else you should know. They're talking about contesting Aunt Eleanor's will. Dad's convinced she wasn't in her right mind when she left you the money and books. I sighed, not surprised, but still disappointed. She was perfectly lucid until the very end. Her doctor will confirm that, as will Uncle Thomas, who was the executor. It's a baseless claim designed to punish me for setting boundaries. That's what I thought too. Mark shifted uncomfortably. They want me to testify that she seemed confused when we saw her at Thanksgiving last year. Dad says if I don't help them, I'm choosing you over family. The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if it weren't so destructive. What are you going to do? I asked, though I thought I already knew the answer. Mark had always been more susceptible to our parents' emotional blackmail than I was. He straightened his shoulders. I'm going to tell the truth. Aunt Eleanor was sharp as ever at Thanksgiving. She beat us all at Scrabble, remember? And even if she hadn't been, trying to overturn her last wishes would be wrong. Pride and something like hope welled up in me. Maybe our family's toxic patterns wouldn't continue into the next generation after all. Maybe Mark could break free before wasting years of his life trying to earn approval that would never be fully given. That couldn't have been an easy decision, I said softly. It wasn't, he admitted. But watching what happened with you, seeing how they turned on you the moment you stopped being useful to them, was like having scales fall from my eyes. I don't want to live like that anymore, constantly trying to earn love that should be unconditional. We talked for another hour, sharing perspectives and memories, seeing our childhood through new lenses. There were painful realizations, patterns of favoritism and neglect that had shaped both of us in different ways, but also moments of unexpected connection. For perhaps the first time, we were speaking to each other as adults with agency, rather than as roles in our family drama. When we finally parted, Mark hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you, he said, for standing up for yourself even when it was hard, even when it meant standing alone. Those words stayed with me as I continued. Preparing for my move, standing alone had been the hardest part of this journey. Facing the disapproval, not just of my parents, but of extended family and friends who didn't understand why I had abandoned my family in their time of need. The narrative they created cast me as selfish, ungrateful, money-hungry, the villain in a story where I had actually been the longest-suffering victim. But now, with Mark's acknowledgement and Aunt Eleanor's posthumous support, I wasn't standing completely alone anymore. And the foundation I was building for myself, financially, emotionally, practically, was stronger than any I could have created while constantly shoring up everyone else's needs. The preliminary hearing for my father's theft charge came and went. He accepted a plea deal that included probation, community service, and mandatory financial counseling sessions. The restraining order remained in place. I didn't attend the hearing, having said all I needed to say through the legal process. My parents did attempt to contest Aunt Eleanor's will, filing paperwork that claimed she had been unduly influenced by me and was not of sound mind when she made her bequest. Uncle Thomas, furious at their allegations, hired an excellent attorney who quickly assembled documentation from Eleanor's doctors, attorney, and friends attesting to her mental clarity. The case was dismissed before it even reached a formal hearing. Through all of this legal maneuvering, I maintained my silence. I didn't argue with them directly, didn't defend myself to mutual acquaintances who passed along their version of events, didn't engage with the narrative they were constructing. I simply continued building my new life, brick by steady brick. By March, I had moved into my new condo, a bright one-bedroom on the 12th floor of a well-maintained building. Floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room offered a view of the city skyline, and the spare bedroom I converted into a home office had a perfect nook for Aunt Eleanor's bookshelves. I arranged her volumes there, organized by her own system rather than traditional library categories, feeling her presence in the carefully annotated margins and thoughtfully placed bookmarks. My photography class ended, but I enrolled in an advanced course, discovering a talent for composition that surprised and delighted me. I began selling prints at local art fairs, nothing that would replace my accounting income, but a creative outlet that brought joy and connection with a community that valued beauty and perspective. Mark kept his word about the payments, sending $500 each month like clockwork. We met for coffee or dinner regularly, our relationship evolving into something healthier than it had ever been during our childhood. He thrived in his less expensive apartment, taking on leadership roles in campus organizations now that he wasn't working so many hours just to afford an unnecessarily fancy address. As for my parents, the consequences of their financial mismanagement could no longer be avoided without my constant bailouts. The bookstore finally closed in April, unable to compete with online retailers and larger chains. They downsized from their house to a 2-bedroom apartment in a less prestigious neighborhood. My mother took a full-time position teaching music at a local community center, and my father, after months of unemployment, found work as a night manager at a hotel. I heard about these developments from Mark, never directly from them. The restraining order against my father expired after 6 months, but he made no attempt to contact me. My mother occasionally sent text messages on holidays or my birthday. Brief formal communications that read like obligations rather than genuine connection. I responded with equal brevity, acknowledging the dates without engaging in deeper conversation. These exchanges weren't reconciliation, but rather the bare minimum of civility. True healing would require acknowledgement of the harm done, genuine remorse, and changed behavior, none of which seemed forthcoming. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, I had been living in my new reality for nearly a year. The holiday had always been fraught in our family, elaborate performances of gratitude overlaying simmering resentments and unspoken expectations. This year, I accepted an invitation from Jennifer, my boss, who hosted a Friendsgiving for colleagues and friends who weren't traveling to be with family. Sitting around her expansive dining table, contributing my homemade cranberry sauce to a potluck feast, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't during family holidays for years. The conversation was genuine, the laughter unforced, the connections based on mutual enjoyment rather than obligation. No one was keeping score of who had given what or who owed whom. No one was maintaining appearances at the expense of authenticity. Mark had chosen to visit our parents for the holiday, a decision I supported completely. His journey with them was his own, and he needed to find his own balance of connection and boundaries. He texted me that evening, a simple message that spoke volumes. "I miss you here, but I understand now why you had to step away. Taking care of myself tomorrow. Love you." Those words, "I understand now why you had to step away," felt like a vindication I hadn't realized I was still seeking. Someone who had been inside the dynamic, who had seen it from the other side, recognized the toxicity that had driven me to such drastic measures. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't selfish. I was protecting myself from a situation that had been slowly destroying me. As the holiday season progressed, I noticed something strange happening. I was receiving invitations. Colleagues invited me to dinner, parties. New friends from my photography class included me in gallery outings. My neighbor asked me to join her book club. Without the constant drain of family emergencies, I had time and energy to nurture connections that had withered during my years of caretaking. I said yes to these invitations, gradually building a chosen family of friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. These relationships were reciprocal, giving and receiving in roughly equal measure, supporting each other without keeping tallies, celebrating successes without jealousy. In early December, exactly 1 year after receiving the holiday card, that had been the final straw. I checked my mailbox to find another cream envelope with my mother's distinctive handwriting. My heart thumped painfully as I carried it upstairs to my condo, unsure whether to open it immediately or toss it directly into the recycling bin. Curiosity won out. Inside was this year's Williams family holiday card. My parents posed stiffly, in front of a Christmas tree, no matching sweaters this time, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. The accompanying note read simply, "Thinking of you this holiday season, Mom and Dad." No apology, no acknowledgement, just a generic sentiment that could have been sent to a distant acquaintance. And yet the fact that they had sent it at all felt significant. They had acknowledged my existence, included me in the holiday ritual, even if in this minimal way. I pinned the card to my refrigerator next to the one from the previous year, a before and after testament to how much had changed. Last year's card had been a painful reminder of my exclusion. This year's was a symbol of how far I had come in valuing myself enough to create boundaries, even when they were painful. The following weekend, I hosted my first dinner party in my new home. Nothing elaborate, just a simple meal shared with Jennifer from work, 2 friends from my photography class, and my neighbor from the book club. We ate at the small dining table I had bought with my own money, drank wine from glasses that had never been used for family gatherings, and laughed freely without walking on eggshells. As I looked around at these people who had entered my life, only after I had started prioritizing myself, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not the obligatory gratitude of family holidays, but genuine appreciation for the authentic connections that were now possible. After my guests left, I curled up in the window seat with a cup of tea, looking out at the glittering city lights. In one of Aunt Eleanor's books, a collection of Mary Oliver's poetry, she had underlined a passage and written a note that summed up the journey of the past year. The most radical act is sometimes simply to choose yourself. I had chosen myself. After years of being defined by what I could give to others, I had reclaimed the right to determine my own worth, to set my own boundaries, to build a life centered on my own well-being rather than others' needs. It hadn't been easy or clean, or free from pain, but it had been necessary. As Christmas approached, Mark invited me to spend the holiday with him and his roommates. Neutral territory, away from our parents and the weight of family expectations. I accepted gratefully, looking forward to creating new traditions based on genuine connection rather than obligation. On Christmas Eve, as we sat around his apartment's slightly lopsided tree drinking hot chocolate spiked with peppermint schnapps, Mark handed me a small, carefully wrapped package. "It's not much," he said, suddenly shy, "but I wanted you to have something meaningful this year." Inside was a framed photograph, one I had never seen before. It showed me at about 7 years old, sitting on Aunt Eleanor's lap as she read, to me from a massive illustrated book. My face was alight with wonder, and Eleanor's expression as she looked down at me was one of pure love and recognition. "Where did you find this?" I asked, throat tight with emotion. "In one of Mom's old albums," Mark admitted. "I borrowed it without asking. I thought you should have it. A reminder that you've always been seen by someone, even when it didn't feel like it." I traced the edge of the frame, overwhelmed by the gift and its significance. In that photograph was evidence of a connection that had sustained me without my fully realizing it. Aunt Eleanor seeing and nurturing the person I truly was, not the role I could fill for others. "Thank you," I said simply, unable to express the fullness of what the image meant to me. He nodded, understanding without further explanation. "You know, I've been thinking about something you said months ago, about building a life that reflects your actual values, not just responding to everyone else's crises. What about it?" I asked, carefully placing the framed photo on his coffee table. "I've decided to change my graduate focus," he said, a new certainty in his voice. Instead of the business track Dad insisted was the only worthwhile option, I'm switching to educational policy. I want to work on programs that help first-generation college students navigate financial aid and support systems. I smiled, recognizing the significance of this choice. He wasn't just changing academic focus. He was claiming his right to determine his own path based on his values, rather than our parents' expectations. That sounds perfect for you, I said. Truthfully, you've always been good at explaining complicated systems in understandable ways. We stayed up late that night, talking about plans and possibilities, the future stretching before us full of choices that were truly our own. For the first time in my adult life, holidays didn't feel like an emotional minefield, but rather a genuine opportunity for connection and joy. Christmas morning brought an unexpected text from my mother. "Merry Christmas, Sarah. Your father and I miss having you here today." No manipulation, no guilt trip, just a simple expression of feeling that acknowledged my absence without demanding my presence. I replied with equal simplicity, "Merry Christmas to you both. I hope you have a peaceful day." It wasn't reconciliation. That would require far more work on their part and readiness on mine that didn't yet exist. But it was civil, adult, communication that respected the current boundaries while leaving open the possibility of evolution. As Mark and I prepared a modest Christmas dinner for ourselves and his roommates, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. From the pain of exclusion symbolized by that holiday card to the freedom of creating my own celebrations based on authentic connection rather than obligation, it had been a transformation more profound than I could have imagined. Aunt Eleanor's inheritance had been the catalyst, but the real change had come from within. The growing recognition of my own worth, the courage to set boundaries even when they hurt, the patience to build a life aligned with my values rather than others' expectations. I thought of the spreadsheet I had created a year ago, tallying all I had given and all I had lost in the process. If I were to create a new accounting now, it would show different measures. The peace I had gained by removing myself from toxic dynamics, the authentic relationships I had nurtured when freed from constant crisis management, the sense of agency that came from making choices that honored my needs rather than suppressing them. There was sadness too, of course. Grief, for the family relationships that might never heal. Mourning for the validation I had sought for so long and might never fully receive. But these feelings no longer dominated my life or defined my choices. They were simply part of a complex emotional landscape that included joy, pride, hope, and a growing sense of possibility. As we sat down to our Christmas dinner, a simple meal prepared with care, rather than the elaborate production my mother had always insisted upon, I raised my glass in a toast. To new traditions and the courage to create them, I said. Mark and his roommates clinked their glasses against mine, the simple ritual feeling more meaningful than any elaborate family toast had ever been. That spring, as the city emerged from winter's grip, I celebrated a full year in my condo. To mark the occasion, I hosted a small gathering, not a formal housewarming, but a celebration of the life I had built for myself. Jennifer from work came, along with friends from my photography group and book club. Mark brought his new girlfriend, a thoughtful graduate student in environmental science who looked at him with genuine appreciation rather than evaluation. The evening flowed with easy conversation and laughter, people connecting across different parts of my life in ways that felt organic and unforced. As I moved through my home, refilling wine glasses and offering appetizers, I caught glimpses of the person I had become. Someone who could host without exhaustion, give without depletion, connect without calculation. Late in the evening, as the gathering was winding down, Mark pulled me aside. "I have news," he said, eyes bright with excitement. "I got that fellowship I applied for, the one with the education advocacy group. It starts in July after graduation." I hugged him, genuinely thrilled. That's wonderful. It's perfect for you. There's more, he continued. The position is in Boston. I'll be moving there this summer. I absorbed this information, feeling both sad at the greater distance and happy for his opportunity. Boston is a great city. You'll thrive there. I already told Mom and Dad, he said, his expression growing more serious. Dad says I'm making a huge mistake turning down the business internship he arranged here. Mom cried about me moving so far away. And how do you feel about their reaction? I asked, curious about his evolving perspective. He shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. A year ago, it would have devastated me. The disapproval, the guilt trips. Now I can see it for what it is. Their attempt to keep me in a role that works for them, regardless of what works for me. His words reflected my own journey so perfectly that I felt a surge of pride. Not just for him, but for both of us. We were breaking generational patterns, creating lives based on our authentic selves rather than prescribed roles. You're going to be amazing in Boston, I said, meaning every word. After everyone left, I sat by my living room window, looking out at the city lights. The year had brought changes I couldn't have imagined when I first received that excluding holiday card. A new home, new friendships, new perspectives, a healthier relationship with my brother, and the beginning of financial security that was truly mine. There had been painful losses too, of course. My relationship with my parents remained distant and formal, limited to occasional text messages and the most basic acknowledgments of major holidays. They had never apologized for the years of taking me for granted, never recognized their role in creating the dynamic that led to our estrangement. From occasional updates through Mark, I knew they struggled with the bookstore's closure and the substantial downgrade in their lifestyle. They told friends and extended family that their financial troubles stemmed from Sarah abandoning us when we needed her most, maintaining the narrative of my selfishness rather than acknowledging their dependency. At times, the lingering sadness of this broken relationship still caught me unawares. A sharp pang when I saw fathers and daughters laughing together in parks, a wistful longing when friends spoke of weekend visits to their parents' homes. But these moments no longer paralyzed me with guilt or sent me running back to destructive patterns. They were simply part of the complex emotional landscape of having chosen my well-being over harmful family dynamics. Summer arrived with unexpected opportunities. My photography hobby had evolved into a modest side business, with local cafes displaying and selling my work. A small gallery in the Arts District invited me to participate in a group show featuring emerging photographers, and to my surprise, several pieces sold on opening night. The extra income allowed me to take a long dreamed-of trip to coastal Maine, where I spent a week in a small cottage near the water, photographing lighthouses and rocky shores in the golden light of dawn and dusk. It was my first real vacation, in years, not a rushed weekend trip slotted between family emergencies, but a deliberately planned break focused entirely on my own enjoyment and creative expression. During those quiet days by the ocean, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in 18 months. The painful catalyst of exclusion from the holiday card had ultimately led to liberation, from financial exploitation, from emotional manipulation, from the exhausting role of family savior. I had learned that standing alone was sometimes necessary for standing in one's truth, that boundaries were not cruel but essential for authentic relationships, that saying no to others could be saying yes to myself. I returned from Maine refreshed and centered, with a portfolio of ocean images that seemed to capture both turbulence and peace, a fitting metaphor for my journey. The first weekend after my return, I helped Mark pack for his move to Boston, carefully wrapping dishes in newspaper and Tetrising boxes into his second-hand SUV. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Aunt Eleanor hadn't left you that inheritance? He asked as we took a break, sitting on his half-empty apartment floor with takeout containers balanced on our knees. I considered the question carefully. I think the change was already beginning before the money arrived. The holiday card exclusion was my wake-up call, the moment I couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. Eleanor's inheritance gave me practical options, but the decision to stop enabling unhealthy dynamics had already taken root. He nodded thoughtfully. For me, it was watching how quickly they turned on you. One day you were the reliable daughter they could always count on. The next, you were selfish and cruel for not giving them money they felt entitled to. It made me question whether their love was ever about who we are rather than what we could provide. The observation was painful, but accurate. I think they love us in their way, I said after a moment. But their version of love is possessive and conditional, tied to our usefulness and compliance rather than our authentic selves. Do you think they'll ever change? He asked, voicing the question I had asked myself countless times. I sighed, considering my answer carefully. People can change when they recognize their behavior is causing harm and take responsibility for it, but that requires self-awareness and humility, which aren't traits our parents have demonstrated much of. So you don't think reconciliation is possible? I think true reconciliation would require acknowledgement of the harm done, genuine remorse, and changed behavior, none of which seem forthcoming, I said, echoing thoughts I had processed in therapy. I'm open to a different kind of relationship. If they ever do that work, but I'm not holding my breath or putting my life on hold waiting for it. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'm still trying to figure out my boundaries with them. It's harder from a distance in some ways. Easier to maintain the peace in short phone calls, but harder to establish real change. You'll find your balance, I assured him. And you don't have to have all the answers right now. We finished packing late that night. His apartment transformed into a warren of labeled boxes and empty spaces. As I prepared to leave, he hugged me tightly. Thank you, he said simply. For helping you pack? It's nothing. He shook his head. For showing me it's possible to love your family without being consumed by them. For demonstrating that boundaries aren't selfish but necessary. For being brave enough to go first. His words caught me off guard, emotion tightening my throat. In the midst of my own healing journey, I hadn't fully registered the impact my choices might have on him. How my standing firm might have created space for him to discover his own boundaries. You're doing the hard work yourself, I said, when I could speak. I'm just the imperfect example stumbling along ahead of you. Sometimes that's exactly what we need. Not perfect guides, just someone willing to take the first steps on a difficult path. After Mark left for Boston, I threw myself into a summer of growth and exploration. The success of my photographs in the gallery show led to more opportunities. A commission to create images for a boutique hotel's lobby, an invitation to teach a workshop on urban landscape photography at the community center, a feature in a local arts magazine. My accounting career continued to provide stability and satisfaction, but these creative pursuits added a dimension of joy that had been missing during my years of constant caretaking. The income they generated, modest but meaningful, went into a special account I designated for experiences rather than emergencies. A weekend writing retreat in Michigan, tickets to a symphony performance I would once have considered an extravagant luxury, small indulgences that represented a profound shift in how I valued my own happiness. In August, I received an unexpected email from Uncle Thomas, whom I hadn't heard from since the resolution of the will contest. Dear Sarah, he wrote, I'm writing to share some news and to check in on how you're doing. Your aunt would be proud of how you've honored her gift, and I'd like to hear about your life when you have time. The note touched me deeply. This connection to Eleanor, this recognition of my choices as honoring rather than squandering her legacy. I replied with an update about my condo, my photography, the changes of the past year. I included several images of Aunt Eleanor's books arranged on their custom shelves in my home office, carefully preserved and frequently consulted. His response came within hours, warm and encouraging. We began a correspondence that soon evolved into monthly video calls. Thomas shared stories about Eleanor I had never heard. Her rebellious youth, her decision to pursue library science against her parents' wishes, her brief but passionate romance with an Italian professor during a sabbatical year in Florence. She understood what it meant to choose yourself, Thomas told me during one of our calls. She saw that same courage in you, even when you were still struggling to find it. Those conversations became a treasured connection to my aunt and a window into a different model of family. One based on mutual respect and genuine interest rather than obligation and scorekeeping. Thomas never pressured me about reconciling. With my parents, never minimized the harm they had done, never suggested that family bonds should override personal boundaries. His acceptance of my choices was a healing balm after years of being made to feel selfish for having needs of my own. As autumn approached, bringing cooler air and earlier sunsets, I faced a decision I had been avoiding: how to handle the upcoming holiday season. Last year's improvised celebrations had been freeing, but also tinged with the rawness of recent rupture. This year required more intentional choices rather than reactive ones. After careful consideration, I declined an invitation to join my parents for Thanksgiving, opting instead to volunteer at a community meal service before joining Jennifer and her family for dinner. For Christmas, I planned a trip to Boston to visit Mark in his new city, a chance to create traditions based on genuine connection rather than obligation. I communicated these decisions to my parents in a brief, clear email, neither apologetic nor accusatory. My mother's response was equally brief, but surprisingly lacking in guilt trips or recriminations. "We understand. We'll miss you. Perhaps another time." Those 9 words, devoid of manipulation or blame, felt like the first genuine communication we had exchanged in years. Not an apology or recognition of past harm, but at least an acceptance of my boundaries without the usual emotional artillery designed to breach them. The week before Thanksgiving, a cream envelope arrived in my mailbox, earlier than the usual. Holiday card timing. Inside was a professional family portrait of my parents, posed stiffly in their new, more modest apartment. The accompanying note read, "We're having our holiday cards printed next week. There's still time to include you in the family portrait if you'd like to be part of it." I sat with the invitation for a long time, emotions swirling through me. On one level, it represented what I had wanted for years: inclusion, acknowledgement, visibility within the family narrative. But on another level, it felt like too little, too late, a surface gesture that didn't address the deeper patterns that had led to our estrangement. After careful consideration, I declined with a polite note. "Thank you for thinking of me. I'm not available for a photo session, but I appreciate the invitation. Wishing you well with the holiday preparations." My decision wasn't about punishment or holding grudges. It was about recognizing that true healing would require more than a performative inclusion in a holiday card. It would require honest conversations about harmful patterns, genuine remorse for past behavior, and demonstrated changes in how we related to each other, none of which had yet occurred. I shared my decision with my therapist during our next session, still questioning whether I had made the right choice. "The invitation feels like a step forward," I admitted. "Part of me wonders if I should have accepted it as an olive branch." "Invitations can look like olive branches while actually being fishing hooks," she said thoughtfully. "It's important to distinguish between gestures that represent genuine change and those that simply aim to return to old patterns with a new veneer." Her words resonated with my own instincts. The holiday card invitation hadn't been accompanied by any acknowledgement of past exclusion, any recognition of how their behavior had been harmful, any indication that the underlying dynamics had changed. It was a surface adjustment, including me in the performance of family, while still avoiding the deeper work of creating authentic connection. Reconciliation, when it's healthy, happens through consistent small actions that rebuild trust over time, my therapist continued, not through symbolic gestures that leap over accountability. I nodded, feeling more confident in my decision. I'm open to rebuilding our relationship, but I need evidence that the foundation has changed. Otherwise, we're just constructing the same problematic dynamic with a fresh coat of paint. Thanksgiving arrived crisp and clear, the Chicago sky a brilliant blue against the red and gold of lingering autumn leaves. I spent the morning volunteering at a community center, serving meals alongside other volunteers who had chosen to give their time on the holiday. The work was physically tiring but emotionally nourishing, connection without complication, giving without depletion. In the afternoon, I joined Jennifer and her extended family for dinner in their warm, chaotic home on the north side of the city. Children raced through the rooms, dogs begged for scraps under the table. 3 generations gathered around mismatched tables pushed together to accommodate everyone. There were no performances of perfection, no carefully maintained appearances, just the messy, genuine connection of people who accepted each other's flaws and celebrated each other's humanity. As I helped clear dishes after the meal, Jennifer's mother cornered me in the kitchen. "Jennifer tells me you're estranged from your parents," she said without preamble, her direct approach catching me off guard. "We have a complicated relationship," I answered carefully, not sure where the conversation was heading. She nodded, efficiently scraping leftovers into containers. My mother was a narcissist who never met an emotion she couldn't weaponize. Haven't spoken to her in 15 years. Her matter-of-fact delivery of this personal history stunned me into momentary silence. "Best decision I ever made," she continued, rinsing a serving platter. "Built a life with people who can love without keeping score. Found family instead of being trapped in biological obligation." "Did you ever reconcile with her?" I asked, curious about this woman's journey that seemed to parallel my own. "No." She handed me a dish towel. "She never did the work to earn back my trust. Spent 20 years blaming me for her loneliness instead of examining her behavior. Died bitter and alone, exactly as she'd lived." The blunt assessment was jarring but also oddly comforting. Permission to acknowledge that not all family rifts can or should be mended, that sometimes estrangement is the healthiest choice for all involved. "Some people will tell you that family is everything, that you have to forgive and forget for your own peace," Jennifer's mother continued. "But real peace comes from boundaries that protect your spirit, not from forcing yourself to accept mistreatment because of shared DNA." I nodded, throat tight with unexpected emotion. I'm still learning that balance, being open to authentic connection without compromising my well-being. "It's a lifelong practice," she said, patting my arm with a soapy hand. "But you're doing the hard work, and that's what matters." That conversation stayed with me through the evening and into the following days. Not as a blueprint for my own journey, but as validation that there were multiple possible paths forward, multiple ways to define family and connection that weren't limited to biological relationships or social expectations. December arrived with swirling snow and holiday displays in every storefront. I decorated my condo simply but meaningfully. A small tree adorned with ornaments I had chosen myself, candles in the windows, a wreath on the door. I baked cookies from Aunt Eleanor's recipe cards, found tucked between the pages of a vintage cookbook among her collection. As I prepared for my trip to Boston to visit Mark, I received another envelope from my parents, this year's official holiday card. With some trepidation, I opened it to find a photo of just the two of them, posed beside their Christmas tree. The accompanying note read, "We respected your decision about the family portrait. Perhaps next year. Wishing you peace this holiday season." The acknowledgement of my boundary, respecting my decision rather than pushing against it, felt like a tiny shift in the right direction. Not reconciliation, not full understanding, but at least a small recognition of my autonomy. I placed the card on my mantle alongside ones from friends and colleagues, neither hiding it in shame nor giving it prominence beyond its significance. The week before Christmas, I flew to Boston, excited to explore Mark's new city and the life he was creating there. He met me at the airport with a warm hug and a confidence in his bearing that hadn't been there before his move. As we drove into the city, he pointed out landmarks and favorite discoveries with genuine enthusiasm. "I'm finally using my marketing degree in ways that actually matter," he explained as we settled into his small but tidy apartment. "The education advocacy group lets me create campaigns that help first-generation college students navigate systems that were designed to exclude them. It feels like actually making a difference, not just selling products no one needs." His passion was infectious, his purpose clear in a way it had never been when following our father's prescribed path. Over the following days, we explored Boston, together, wandering the Freedom Trail, visiting museums, discovering neighborhood cafes where Mark was already known by name. On Christmas Eve, we joined a group of his colleagues for dinner at his supervisor's home, another gathering of chosen family, people connected by shared values and genuine affection rather than obligation. I watched Mark interact with these new friends, noting the ease in his manner, the absence of the constant tension that had characterized his behavior during family gatherings in the past. Later, as we walked back to his apartment through gently falling snow, he linked his arm through mine. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For showing me it was possible to break free without breaking apart. For demonstrating that boundaries aren't walls but foundations for healthier relationships. For going first so I could follow." His words caught me by surprise, emotion tightening my throat. In the midst of my own healing journey, I hadn't fully registered the impact my choices might have had on him, how my standing firm might have created space for him to discover his own boundaries. "I think we're both finding our way," I said when I could speak. Different paths, but parallel journeys. On Christmas morning, we exchanged simple gifts over coffee and homemade cinnamon rolls. Mark had framed one of my ocean photographs from my Maine trip, adding a quote from Mary Oliver at the bottom. "You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting." The words, so perfectly capturing the journey from obligation to authenticity, brought tears to my eyes. I gave him a vintage compass I had found in an antique store, engraved with new words, "Follow your own true north." As we prepared a modest Christmas dinner together, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Merry Christmas, Sarah. Your father and I are thinking of you today." Simple, straightforward, without manipulation or hidden barbs. I replied in kind, "Merry Christmas to you both. I hope you have a peaceful day." These brief exchanges, neither deeply connected nor actively hostile, represented our new reality. Not reconciliation, not the loving family relationship I had once desperately sought, but a civil distance that acknowledged our shared history without ignoring the harm that had occurred. Later, as Mark and I sat by his small Christmas tree drinking hot chocolate, mine spiked with peppermint schnapps, his with bourbon, he asked the question I had been pondering myself. "Do you think we'll ever have a real relationship with them? Again? Something beyond text messages and holiday cards?" I considered my answer carefully. I think it would require them to do work they may not be capable of, acknowledging the harmful patterns, taking responsibility for their behavior, demonstrating consistent change over time. I'm open to that possibility, but I'm not holding my breath or putting my life on hold waiting for it. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm still trying to figure out my boundaries with them. It's harder from a distance in some ways. Easier to maintain surface pleasantries in short phone calls, but harder to establish real change." "You'll find your balance," I assured him, "and you don't have to have all the answers right now." As midnight approached, we stepped onto his small balcony to watch snow falling on the city, covering Boston in a blanket of pristine white. In the distance, church bells began to ring, welcoming Christmas Day with their clear, bright tones. Standing there with my brother, both of us finding our way toward lives of integrity and purpose, both creating meaning beyond the limited roles we had been assigned, I felt a profound sense of peace. Not the false peace of compliance or the exhausted peace of capitulation, but the earned peace of living authentically despite difficult odds. The journey had been painful, the losses real and significant. I still carried grief for the family relationships that might never heal. Still felt twinges of the old guilt when setting boundaries. Still sometimes questioned whether I had done everything possible to preserve connections while protecting myself. But alongside these shadows were new forms of light. Genuine friendships based on mutual respect. Creative pursuits that nourished rather than depleted me. Financial security, built on my own terms, and a relationship with my brother that had evolved from obligatory to chosen. I had discovered that standing alone was sometimes necessary for standing in one's truth, that boundaries were not cruel, but essential for authentic relationships, that saying no to others could be saying yes to myself. As the new year approached, I looked ahead with neither naive optimism nor cynical resignation, but with a grounded hope built on evidence of my own resilience. Whatever challenges came next, I would face them as the person I had chosen to become, someone who valued her own worth, who recognized the difference between giving from abundance and giving from depletion, who understood that genuine love empowers rather than diminishes. The holiday card that had once symbolized my exclusion had ultimately led to my liberation, not just from financial exploitation or emotional manipulation, but from the limited definition of family that valued performance over authenticity, appearance over connection, compliance over growth. I had inherited more than money and books from Aunt Eleanor. I had inherited permission to write my own story, to define family on my own terms, to create relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. And that inheritance, the courage to choose myself even when it meant standing alone, was proving to be the most valuable gift of all. 5 years have passed since that first Excluded holiday card arrived in my mailbox. 5 years of growth, healing, and rebuilding a life centered on my authentic self rather than others' expectations. Looking back now, from the vantage point of hard-earned wisdom, I can trace the profound transformation that began with that small but significant rejection. My condo has become a true home. Walls adorned with my own photography alongside art from local creators I've befriended. Shelves filled with Aunt Eleanor's books and new volumes I've collected on my own journey. The space reflects who I am, rather than who others expected me to be. Creative, thoughtful, appreciative of beauty in unexpected places. My career took an unexpected turn 3 years ago, when I combined my accounting expertise with my passion for the arts. Now, I run a small consulting business that helps creative professionals and arts organizations manage their finances. The work is deeply satisfying, using my analytical skills to support others in pursuing their passions rather than simply balancing corporate ledgers. Photography remains a vital creative outlet, with several successful gallery shows behind me and a modest but growing reputation in the local arts community. Last year, I published a small book of urban landscapes paired with reflective essays, an artistic and financial success that would have been impossible during my years of financial caretaking for my family. Mark has flourished in Boston, his education advocacy work expanding to a regional leadership role. He recently bought his first home, a small but charming townhouse in Cambridge that he shares with Rachel, his girlfriend of 3 years. They met through a volunteer literacy program, their relationship built on shared values and mutual support, rather than obligation or dependency. When they announced their engagement last month, Mark called me first, before telling our parents. "You're the one who taught me what healthy love looks like," he explained. "It seemed right that you should hear the news first." I flew to Boston for their engagement party, a joyful gathering of friends who had become chosen family. Over late-night tea in their kitchen after the celebrations, Mark confided that he was unsure about involving our parents in the wedding. Planning. "We're thinking of a small ceremony, just close friends and a few family members," he explained, nervousness evident in his voice. I want to invite Mom and Dad, but I'm worried about the dynamics. They still see me as an extension of themselves rather than an independent person. I nodded, understanding his concern. What does Rachel think? She's only met them twice, and both times were. He searched for a diplomatic description. Challenging. Dad tried to take over all the conversations, and Mom made several comments about how Rachel should consider a more practical career than elementary education. The patterns remained consistent, even after years of reduced contact. Our parents still approached relationships as opportunities to control and direct rather than connect and support. You don't have to decide everything now, I advised gently. Think about what boundaries would make this celebration joyful rather than stressful, then communicate them clearly. Remember that inviting them is separate from giving them authority over your choices. He smiled ruefully. Still learning from you after all these years. My relationship with our parents has evolved into what therapists call structured contact, limited, boundaried interactions that acknowledge our connection without inviting the harmful dynamics that characterized our past. I see them 2 or 3 times a year for brief visits in public places, lunches at restaurants, walks in botanical gardens, occasional museum exhibitions. These encounters are civil, but rarely deep. We discuss safe topics, weather, local news, health updates, Mark's career successes. We avoid discussions of money, my photography, which they still view as a hobby rather than a legitimate creative pursuit, or any topics that might reveal the vast differences in our values and worldviews. They have never apologized for the years of financial dependence, never acknowledged the systematic exclusion symbolized by those holiday cards, never recognized how their behaviors contributed to our estrangement. In their narrative, I simply changed after receiving Aunt Eleanor's inheritance, becoming suddenly selfish after years of being the dependable daughter they could rely on. This revised history allows them to maintain their self-image as blameless victims while avoiding accountability for their role in our fractured relationship. It's frustrating, but no longer devastating. I've learned to accept that their perception of reality may never align with mine, that the validation I once desperately sought may never come from them. Instead, I've found that validation elsewhere, in relationships built on mutual respect, in professional accomplishments recognized on their merits, in creative expression that resonates with others, in the freedom to make choices based on my own values rather than external expectations. My father's health declined significantly 2 years ago after a second heart attack left him with reduced stamina and mobility. My mother called in a panic, her voice tight with fear and a familiar undertone of expectation. "We need you to come. Right away. Your father's in the hospital. We can't manage this alone." I flew to their city immediately, but with clear boundaries about my role. I helped navigate the healthcare system, translated medical information, coordinated with insurance companies, all practical support that leveraged my organizational skills without reopening old wounds of financial or emotional dependency. When they suggested I should take a leave of absence from work to care for my father during his recovery, I gently but firmly declined. "I'll help you find and hire qualified home health aides," I offered instead. "My business requires my presence, but I can assist with researching options and setting up services." The disappointment was evident in my mother's tight smile, my father's dismissive wave. 5 years earlier, their reaction would have triggered waves of guilt and shame, sending me scrambling to rearrange my life to meet their expectations. Now I recognized their disappointment for what it was, not a reflection of my worth as a daughter, but a response to the loss of control over my choices. I stayed for a week, helping establish systems that would support their needs without sacrificing my well-being. Before leaving, I set up a grocery delivery service, arranged for a visiting nurse, and created a schedule of local friends and church members who had volunteered to help with transportation to medical appointments. "This isn't enough," my father said as I prepared to leave. "We need you here, not just arrangements made by phone. I took a deep breath, centering myself before responding. I've created sustainable support systems that will meet your practical needs. I'll check in regularly and visit when I can, but my life and business are in Chicago now. Your life should be with your family, my mother interjected, the familiar guilt trip unfolding exactly as I had anticipated. Family comes first, Sarah. We raised you to understand that. In the past, these words would have cut deeply, activating my deeply ingrained sense of obligation. Now I could see them for what they were, an attempt to override my boundaries and reassert control. I value family, I said calmly. That's why I've arranged all these supports and come to help this past week. But I also value the life I've built, the business I've created, and the commitments I've made to clients and employees who depend on me. My father turned away, signaling the end of the conversation in his characteristic fashion. My mother pursed her lips, disapproval radiating from her rigid posture. But I left anyway, secure in the knowledge that I had offered appropriate support without sacrificing my own well-being. This pattern, offering practical assistance within clear boundaries while resisting attempts to pull me back into old dynamics, has characterized our relationship since my father's health crisis. I send care packages with healthy snacks and useful items. I research medical questions when they arise. I coordinate with Mark to ensure neither of us is overwhelmed by caretaking responsibilities. But I maintain the emotional and financial boundaries that protect my hard-won stability. Last December, as the holiday season approached, I received the now familiar cream envelope containing the annual Williams family Christmas card. Opening it with curiosity rather than dread, I found a formal portrait of my parents seated on their living room sofa. My father notably thinner than the previous year. My mother's smile tight but determined. What surprised me was the note inside. Not the usual generic holiday greeting, but a handwritten message in my mother's distinctive script. We're considering having a professional photographer come to the house for next year's holiday portrait when you and Mark visit for Thanksgiving. Please think about it. The invitation represented a small but significant shift. Not, we're scheduling a photographer, please make yourself available, but we're considering, and please think about it. Language that acknowledged my agency and respected my right to choose. I sat with the invitation for several days, examining my feelings without rushing to respond. The old longing for inclusion and recognition still flickered faintly, but it no longer dominated my emotional landscape. I had built a life rich with meaning and connection that didn't depend on their validation. Eventually, I replied with equal thoughtfulness, "Thank you for thinking of me. I haven't made my Thanksgiving plans yet, but I'll let you know by summer if I'll be able to join you. I appreciate the invitation." Neither commitment nor rejection, just honest communication that honored both the tentative olive branch they had extended and my own need to make choices based on my well-being rather than obligation. The exchange typified our current relationship. Civil but careful, acknowledging connection without ignoring the harm that had occurred, open to incremental healing without expecting dramatic transformation. We were finding a way to maintain family ties without returning to toxic patterns, creating a new normal that might not be deeply satisfying but was at least not actively damaging. Meanwhile, my relationship with Uncle Thomas had deepened into one of the most meaningful family connections in my life. Our monthly video calls evolved into regular visits, me traveling to his home in Arizona twice a year, him coming to Chicago each spring to attend gallery openings featuring my work. During his most recent visit, as we sat in my living room surrounded by Aunt Eleanor's books, he shared a revelation that brought our connection full circle. "Eleanor always worried about you, you know," he said, turning a signed first edition of To the Lighthouse gently in his hands. "Even when you were a teenager, she saw what was happening in your family. How your parents were shaping you to be their security system rather than your own person." I nodded, memories surfacing of conversations with Eleanor during my college years. Her gentle questions about my dreams and ambitions, always followed by careful inquiries about what my parents expected from me. She almost intervened several times, Thomas continued. But she worried that confronting your parents directly would only make things worse for you. Instead, she decided to offer you an alternative perspective whenever she could, and to make provisions that might eventually help you break free. The inheritance, I said softly, the pieces clicking into place. He nodded. She revised her will after that last Thanksgiving when she saw you, exhausted, thinner than you should have been, constantly checking your phone for messages from your parents. She told me, Thomas, that child is disappearing into their needs. I need to throw her a lifeline before she drowns completely. Tears welled in my eyes as I imagined Eleanor observing my situation with such clarity and compassion, planning even then to provide the practical support that might help me claim my independence. She would be so proud of what you've built, Thomas said, gesturing to the photography awards on my bookshelf, the business certification on my wall, the warm and welcoming home I had created. Not just the external successes, but the internal strength. You've become fully yourself, Sarah. That was always her hope for you. His words offered a different kind of inheritance, the validation that my journey toward authenticity honored Eleanor's intentions rather than betrayed my family obligations. The reassurance that someone had seen my struggle and understood it, even before I could fully articulate it myself. This spring brought another unexpected development in my ongoing family saga. Mark called one evening, his voice a mixture of concern and cautious optimism. Mom reached out about the wedding, he began. She actually asked what kind of involvement Rachel and I would be comfortable with, instead of just telling us what they expect. I raised my eyebrows, surprised by this departure from established patterns. That's new. What did you tell her? That we'd like them to participate as guests who support our choices rather than as directors of the event, he said. And I mentioned that Rachel's parents have offered to contribute financially without any strings attached, so we don't need or want financial help from them. How did she respond? She was quiet for a minute. Then she said something that really surprised me. She said, I understand. We haven't always been good at respecting boundaries, have we? I nearly dropped my phone. In all our years of strained relations, neither of our parents had ever acknowledged their boundary violations so directly. I know, Mark continued, reading my silence correctly. I was shocked too. She didn't apologize exactly, but it was the closest thing to self-awareness I've ever heard from her. Dad got on the phone later and was still Dad. Asked about my 401k and suggested we were spending too much on photography. But even he seemed less forceful than usual. People can change, I said cautiously, especially when they realize their old behaviors are costing them relationships they value. I'm not getting my hopes up too high, Mark clarified, but I thought you should know. Maybe some of what we've been modeling is finally sinking in. After we hung up, I sat for a long time by my living room window, watching the city lights emerge as dusk settled over Chicago. 5 years of steady, consistent boundaries, neither cutting contact completely nor returning to harmful patterns of enabling, had created space for small but meaningful shifts in our family dynamic. I didn't harbor illusions about dramatic transformation or picture-perfect reconciliation. My parents were in their 70s now, their worldviews and relationships shaped by decades of habitual patterns that wouldn't change overnight, if ever. But Mark's news suggested that perhaps, in their own limited way, they were beginning to recognize that maintaining connections with their adult children required respecting our autonomy. The following weekend, I met Jennifer for our monthly brunch at our favorite lakefront cafe. Over the years, she had evolved from boss to mentor to cherished friend, her straightforward perspective and unwavering support helping me navigate the complex terrain of family estrangement and boundary setting. So your mother actually acknowledged boundary issues, she said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully after I shared Mark's news. That's significant. It's something, I agreed. Not an apology or deep insight, but at least a recognition that there's a pattern. How does it make you feel? She asked, her direct question typical of her no-nonsense approach. I considered before answering. Cautiously hopeful, I guess. Not for some Hollywood reconciliation scene with tears and hugs and instantly healed. Relationships. But maybe for a more honest interaction going forward, one where we can acknowledge reality instead of maintaining fictions. She nodded. You know what strikes me most about your journey these past 5 years? You're no longer defining yourself in relation to them, either in compliance or in rebellion. You're living from your center, making choices based on your values rather than reactions to their behavior. Her observation resonated deeply. In the early days of establishing boundaries, much of my energy had gone into resisting old patterns and expectations. Now my focus had shifted to creating rather than resisting, building a life aligned with my authentic self, forming relationships based on reciprocity and respect, pursuing work that utilized my gifts without depleting my spirit. The opposite of dependency isn't isolation, I said, articulating a realization that had been forming gradually. It's interdependence, relationships where everyone retains their autonomy while supporting each other's growth. Exactly, Jennifer agreed. And you've built that kind of network now, with friends, colleagues, clients, your brother. People who see you clearly and value you for who you are, not what you can provide. That evening, going through old files in preparation for tax season, I came across the spreadsheet I had created 5 years earlier. The careful accounting of all I had given my family financially and all I had sacrificed in the process. The dollar amount still startled me, $103,426 over 6 years, not including the countless hours of emotional labor and practical support. But more striking than the number was my reaction to it now, not the raw pain and betrayal I had felt when first calculating it, but a calm recognition of both the harm done and the growth that had followed. That financial exploitation had been real and significant, but it no longer defined me or my worth. I closed the file without updating it. There was no need to keep that ledger anymore. The accounting that mattered now was different. Not a tally of grievances, but an appreciation of the rich and meaningful life I had created from the ashes of those painful experiences. The following week brought an unexpected email from my mother, a brief message with an attached photo that made my breath catch. Found this while organizing old albums, she wrote. Thought you might want a copy. The image showed me at about 9 years old, sitting cross-legged on our old living room floor, completely absorbed in a large photography book open on my lap. Aunt Eleanor sat nearby in an armchair, watching me with an expression of such loving recognition that it brought tears to my eyes. I had no memory of the moment, or even of the book itself, but the photo captured something essential. My early fascination with visual storytelling, Eleanor's quiet encouragement of my interests, a connection based on seeing and nurturing my authentic self rather than molding me to meet others' needs. After a moment's reflection, I replied with simple gratitude. Thank you for sharing this. It's a special memory I'll treasure. My mother's response came quickly. There are others like this in the albums. Let me know if you'd like to look through them sometime. The invitation hung in the air, not demanding immediate acceptance, not laden with accusations about my absence, just a door left slightly ajar for me to consider when and how I might want to step through it. I sat with the invitation for several days, turning it over in my mind like a smooth stone found on a beach. There was no urgency to respond, no pressure to make a grand decision about reconciliation versus estrangement. Just an opportunity to acknowledge a shared history while maintaining the healthy boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. Eventually, I replied with equal openness, I'd like that sometime, perhaps when I'm in town for Mark's wedding planning. This summer, we could set aside an afternoon. Small steps, tentative connections, Realistic expectations. The path forward wasn't about dramatic confrontations or emotional declarations, but rather consistent, incremental choices that honored both the possibility of evolving relationships and the necessity of self-protection. As spring blossomed into summer, I continued building the life I had chosen, expanding my business to include workshops for artists on financial sustainability, planning a photography series documenting Chicago's hidden green spaces, deepening friendships based on mutual respect and shared values. My days were full of purpose and meaning, my choices guided by internal compass rather than external expectations. The holiday card that had once symbolized my exclusion had ultimately catalyzed my liberation, not just from financial exploitation or emotional manipulation, but from the limited definition of family that valued performance over authenticity, appearance over connection, compliance over growth. Looking back now, I can see that what appeared to be rejection was actually a gift, painful but necessary clarity about my place in my family's narrative. That exclusion forced me to confront patterns I had been desperately trying to ignore, to acknowledge that no amount of sacrifice would earn me the unconditional love and acceptance I sought. And in that acknowledgement came freedom, to define family on my own terms, to create relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation, to build a life centered on my authentic self rather than others' expectations. The journey hasn't been easy or straight. There have been moments of doubt, painful losses, grief for the family relationships I once imagined possible. But alongside those shadows have emerged new forms of light, genuine connections, creative expression, financial security on my own terms, the profound peace that comes from living in alignment with one's true nature. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my parents. Perhaps these small openings will lead to meaningful growth and greater understanding. Perhaps the patterns are too deeply entrenched for significant change, but I no longer pin my worth or happiness on that outcome. Instead, I focus on nurturing the connections that feed rather than deplete me, on creating rather than enabling, on offering compassion without sacrificing boundaries. I've learned that standing alone is sometimes necessary for standing in one's truth, that setting limits is not selfish but essential for authentic relationships, that choosing oneself is sometimes the most healing choice for all involved. And when the year's end brings another cream envelope in my mailbox, I'll open it with curiosity rather than dread. Not because the holiday card still holds power over my sense of belonging, but because I've discovered that true belonging comes from honoring one's authentic self rather than contorting to fit others' expectations. Whatever that envelope contains, inclusion or exclusion, recognition or erasure, it no longer defines me. I've written my own story now, one in which I am neither villain nor victim, but the heroine of my own unfolding journey. And that narrative, authored with courage and self-compassion, is the true inheritance I'll carry forward into all the seasons yet to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.